1205th day of the war. The president of Serbia, Aleksandar Vucic, came to Ukraine for the first time, but the one who recently flew to Moscow for the parade. All this was within the framework of the Summit of Ukraine, Southeastern Europe. He emphasized the adherence of Serbia to the principle of territorial integrity of Ukraine and promised to help restore the cities of the country. All this, of course, caused Zhenya to have a lower back. Zelensky voiced possible plans of Russia, the capture of Donetsk and Lugansk by autumn, the buffer in the Sumy region by winter, Odessa in 2026. Let me remind you, the next on the line may no longer be Kyiv, but Bucharest. With the current pace of Russia's offensive and its success, all these plans are unlikely to be realized, but they must be taken into account. The Russians reached the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region on the cover of the direction, but they are there for a short time. Ukrainian drones destroy assault groups on the sidelines. However, the USU again has a problem with fortifications and mining. In Russia, the war recruitment has long turned into a multi-level business. Each is recruited up to 350,000 rubles. Contracts are filed, emergency services are threatened with a storm, parents are imprisoned, and right-wingers no longer have time to collect complaints. A video appeared of one Russian soldier beating another with an iron pipe. Violence, including in relation to his fellow servicemen, has become a common practice in the Russian army, which is told by the prisoner soldier ref on whose phone this video was found. The self-proclaimed LPR, meanwhile, the products of the war in Torgo coincided. Next to the image of the soldier, a table of fresh meat was materialized. Such frankness did not find a response from the Z channels, which were very outraged. This and much more in today's Fresh Meat, which you can support with your like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Especially your subscriptions are important for YouTube algorithms so that the video can be promoted. A remarkable event took place in Kyiv, the Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit. The most interesting moments are shared by the channel Beat It. Russian military plans indicate this region. Odessa and then the borders with Moldova and Romania, said Vladimir Zelensky at the Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit. I think that Zelensky voiced the data about the plans of Russia, which were shown last Wednesday during the visit of Yermak and to Washington. The capture of the Donetsk-Lugansk regions in autumn, the buffer zone in the Sumy region by the end of the year, Odessa Nacke in the 26th, plus the left bank of Ukraine with the exit to Dnipro. The current pace of Russian promotion, although in June they are the highest since November 24, do not allow them to achieve their goals in a given period of time, so for now Russian ambitions remain Russian ambitions. Another thing is that Zelensky is obliged to constantly remind about this, since the Europeans are the next. I would also like to note the statement of the President of Serbia, Aleksandar Vucic, who visited Ukraine for the first time since the full-scale invasion. He suggested that Serbia restore one or two Ukrainian cities and speak for full support for sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, writes Beat It. Here is another blow to the back. However, there is nothing else to expect from Russia after the almost complete loss of the status of superpowers against the background of the exhaustion of resources in the war with Ukraine, which we may still talk about. Well, we're without Trump. The President of the United States does not intend to withdraw from the peace-regulating negotiations in Ukraine, said President of Finland Stubb in an interview with NHK. Stubb noted that he often talks on the phone with the American president, and there are no signs that he will withdraw from the negotiating process. In general, it seems to me that Stubb took on the role of a European negotiator with Trump, finding a common language with him, and even playing golf. As a result, Trump has not yet come out of the negotiating process, but he does not take any action against Russia. So how successful is Stubb's activity? It is difficult to say. At the same time, it is necessary to remember that Trump repeats who he will talk to last, so he should regularly remind that Russia is actually an aggressor, because there is no hope for incompetent Lizabladov from the U.S. administration in this sense. Also, as for Trump, the Russia Now Contacts channel, and not only him, recalls one quote from the American president. We will soon find out whether Putin is fooling us or not, and if so, then we will answer a little differently, and it will take 1.5 or 2 weeks. Trump said this on May 28, that is, just 2 weeks ago. If anything, this is the third 2 weeks that Trump gave Putin, although it feels like at least the fifth. I ran out of comments on this, so I'll give a meme. I gave Putin 2 weeks, just 2, that's all he got. I was very fair, very generous. But guess what? The time has come. He did not listen. He never listens. Very sad, very weak. So now I'm announcing something new, the most powerful, the most destructive, the most beautiful 2 more weeks that you have ever seen. It starts right now. It will be absolutely empty. Look carefully. This is a meme, not real Trump's words, but unfortunately even this meme is more serious than those that Trump has been doing lately. If there used to be at least tweets, then now there is nothing at all. Ukraine will arm itself with the British air defense systems of low range, the Rapid Ranger. On this Wednesday, June 11, Prime Minister of Ukraine Denis Shmyhal informed the government at a meeting. According to him, Ukraine will attract almost £1.7 billion of sterling financial aid from Great Britain to buy additional anti-aircraft missile systems and missiles to them. We are talking about the purchase of anti-aircraft missile systems, the Rapid Ranger and Multipurpose Light Rocket LMM lightweight multi-role missile, the supply of which in the amount of 5,000 units was announced early in the spring. The project is financed by a loan guaranteed by the British state agency UK Export Finance (UKF). In addition to the supply of weapons, the international agreement provides for the localization of production and transmission of technology of LMM missiles. Schmegel emphasized that the British weapons will significantly enhance the capabilities of Ukrainian air defense. The head of the government added that this month Great Britain also announced record aid in the delivery of drones. They're talking about £350 million, which will allow Ukraine to deliver 100,000 unmanned vehicles already this year. The Rapid Ranger system is essentially an autonomous launch vehicle weighing less than 500 kilograms, which can be integrated into any platform of corresponding cargo capacity. It is equipped with a system of daytime and thermal imaging cameras for working in low-light conditions at night, as well as an automatic target tracking system and a 360-degree viewfinder. The complex can be connected to any command system, and the range of detection of the target is more than 15 kilometers, and the effective range of capture is more than 7. The Rapid Ranger carries 4 missiles ready to launch, which, depending on the task, can be either Star Strike 2 or LMM, as well as their possible combination. The launch of the rocket is carried out exclusively using a laser beam. One of the main characteristics of the effective air defense system is its echelonability. Between large rangers such as Patriot and Nacke with its mobile fire groups with machine guns, the average and small range of rangers should be separated, which can hunt both rockets and high-flying drones, which are inaccessible for shooters in arms. Another good news from Europe. Chancellor of Germany Friedrich Merz intends to appoint a new head of the Federal Intelligence Service of German Foreign Intelligence, responsible directly for the federal office. The German ambassador to Ukraine, Martin Jäger, should be appointed to them, says Der Spiegel. This is important because intelligence will finally be headed by a person who is not familiar with the Russian threat and the situation in the most threatening direction for Europe. This is an extremely necessary change. The state of German intelligence is eloquent, says at least an episode, when in 1922 it had so much Russian invasion that on February 24, the head of the intelligence service appointed by Merkel, Bruno Kohl, was in Kyiv, and he had to be taken out of Ukraine under protection of the special forces for 2 days. Now Kohl will go as an ambassador to the Vatican, says Der Spiegel, a worthy completion of his career. The Okogor channel summarizes the results of the Ukrainian strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation in May, publishing a map of confirmed attacks. A total of 21 recorded attacks, of which 1 is the military part of space reconnaissance, 3 airdromes, 13 enterprises related to the VPK, and additional 4 were attacked, repeated for a month. Accent Nahimprom and the production of ammunition. As we can see, in June, the tactics of Ukraine on attacks on the Russian VPK continues quite effectively. On the night of May 11, Russia, in which the last days were hit by sheiks in the residential building of Kharkov in Kharkov, the work continues after the night strike of Russian sheiks, wrote Vladimir Zelensky. The attack took place in the usual residential buildings. The situation at the moment when he said this was known: about 64 injured, including 9 children, and unfortunately 3 people died. My condolences to my relatives and loved ones. There were a lot of fires in the city, but as always, our saviors from the GSS of Ukraine cooperated operatively. Thank you for the operability as well as the utility services, the national police, everyone who helps. Every new day is now a new nasty blow to Russia, and almost every blow is indicative. Russia deserves an increase in pressure. Literally every hit on civilian life proves that pressure is insufficient, and there is no need to be afraid. There is no need to postpone new decisions that may complicate the situation for Russia. Without this, they will not go to real diplomacy, and this will first and foremost depend on the United States and other world leaders. Everyone who called for an end to killings in diplomacy must act, said Vladimir Zelensky. Let's move on to the front line. On the western flank of the Pokrovsk direction, the USSR has practically reached the administrative border of the Dnipropetrovsk region. Although, of course, the statements of the Russian Ministry of Defense that they have settled there and are developing further offensive in the region have little in common with reality. However, Russian military officers regularly appear in the Dnipropetrovsk region, although not for long, says the Ukrainian military officer, the author of the Telegram channel Officer. This is what he writes. Russians are being destroyed in PV drones already in the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region. In the direction of Novhadlovka, they come in groups of 4 or 5 real. The enemy there at the moment has not established itself. They just come in to die, and they do it well, says the officer. The Ukrainian journalist Yuri Budusov tells about the situation in this area. Here's what he writes. The enemy has reached the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region, that is, with the central Ukraine. It remains to cross 600 meters, he writes. Instead of systematic decisions, as always, they're looking for where to find some infantry unit to shut down this area, and the army will hold out for a couple of days. It is necessary to start building a modern, real defense line at a distance of 25 kilometers from the front line, the line that first of all protects against drones and motorized assaults. The front edge, masked in landing positions protected by hidden logistics routes, false targets, grown in the fields of hundreds of support points with concrete boxes, which can be seen for 10 kilometers, are not defensive positions, these are just expensive pictures for photos which our troops do not take and which sometimes even interfere with our defense. Our support points were built in open fields according to the frontline standards of about 1915, in the form of the first half of the First World War, because already then open concrete boxes on heights with embrasures for frontal fire were convenient targets for direct fire. From them they already then refused, and now, with the appearance of fiber-optical drones and Mavics with a drop on such unmasked and open positions, there simply will not be a chance for resistance or survival. For high-precision weapons, this is just a goal. Why do we continue to lose money and time? Victory in defense requires planning from the commander's side, which in fact showed that they know how to build a stable defense, says Bucharest. It is interesting that, as I told in my video about the Russian summer offensive, the new front line of defense is just being built, and throughout Kharkov to Zaporizhia, although perhaps Bucharest sees those shortcomings that are not noticeable in satellite images. Sergei Sternenko, a volunteer, shared his vision of the situation. Here's what he writes. The enemy has really almost reached the administrative border of the Dnipropetrovsk region. The Russians have advanced in the Novopavlovsk and Pokrovsk directions. It is not possible to contain them due to the total number of infantry and a number of other factors. I give away the main problems in this direction. A complete absence of anti-mine, and anti-tank, the absence of adequate coverings, fired up whoops, temporary fire positions in the open field. This is actually the only cover, everything else is dug up and breaks between battles. The absence of normal fortifications, Jagaza, Putenka, Dragon's Tooth. Because of this, motorcyclists and armored vehicles break deep into the rear. A standard and beloved problem. There is little interaction, although we are working on it. The neighboring units are objectively weak. There are many of them, they're small, there's almost no infantry, there are no experienced BPA operators after all, where effective landings were carried out earlier. Now there's no such thing. They regularly lie that they have a position, but in fact they are not there. Because of this, our assault groups were ambushed. The destruction of enemy BPA calculations has not been recorded. Several times, models such as Zal and Malny safely flew at an altitude of 200-300 meters without punishment. Most of these problems have not been raised for the first year, but there are no systemic changes in the army, says Sternenko. We have to deal with the issues of improvement and interaction from time to time. He brings the words of his source. Just get to know the units among themselves. Just think about it. It is worth adding a deficit in the number of drones. In fact, the unit that transmitted these data turned to us for help. There are a lot of drones needed there. Only death can stop the Russians, says Sternenko. At the junction of the Pokrovsky and Toretsky directions, the Russians are also trying to infiltrate small groups through Ukrainian defense, but so far this does not bring them more success than on the border with Dnipropetrovsk, says the officer. Several days ago, random Russians jumped on the outskirts of Alexander Kalinov on the Konstantinovsky direction, but as soon as approached, they also died quickly, he says. Before we move on, I remind you that you can support this video and the channel as a whole, first of all with your like, comment, and subscription, and also financially. You can do this on Patreon, the link to which is in the description, and by buying NVPN, which is a means to bypass blockages that allows you to bypass blockages. It is normal to watch YouTube, use Twitter, Instagram. Telegram is soon going to be blocked, at least according to the claims of Klemenko. And in fact, NVPN allows you to get access to the internet in the form you need, and not as the state decided. You can buy it by following the links in the description. This is safe because in Russia it is not yet prohibited to buy and use VPN. Well, by buying NVPN, you support the video output on this channel. But we are moving to the northern direction. Only externally, it seems calm. Ukrainian forces constantly reflect Russian stormy actions on it, and the illusion of calm is created due to the fact that the front is practically not moving, since Russian assaults are even less successful here than in other directions. In one of such attacks, the situation at the site in general is told in deep state. The fighters of the battalion Strength of Freedom, 4th Brigade of the NGU Rubesh show work on the enemy in the disputed area. A rather unusual assault compared to other areas of the front in recent times, since the Russians applied the technique, and again unsuccessfully, since they were met by the fire of the fighters of the defense force. However, the stormy actions themselves in this area are constantly going on. It is especially worth noting the site Verkhniki and Blogrov. After the capture of the village, the enemy continues to actively advance deep along the administrative borders of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. It puts pressure on Grigorovka and sips into the village through the defensive order of the Ukrainian Defense Force, which in recent times has become a frequent occurrence at various sections of the front. There have also been several breakthroughs as far as Serbianka, but for the enemy this breakthrough turned out to be at one end. In general, the enemy uses infantry, which is fixed in large quantities, as well as mortars, drones, and other means of fire support, analysts write. Why is this not the only relatively large assault that the fighters of the Defense Force of Ukraine recently fought off in this direction? The units of the 10th Separate Mountain Assault Brigade fought off the motorcycle attack of the Russians, the military newspaper says. The video reflection of the assault was published by the press service of the brigade. After the capture of the positions of the Ukrainian defenders, the Russians used 19 crossbikes, 3 buggy and a platoon of the assault infantry, which had to approach the Ukrainian borders at high speed. After the discovery of the enemy assault groups, the air was lifted by UAVs in order to intercept. The elimination of the enemy life force was carried out with the help of combined use of drones, as well as drones with a drop of ammunition. Thanks to the high qualification of the operators of the 10th Brigade, it was possible to accurately hit the Russian assault troops right during the movement. After the reflection of the attack, 3 Russian servicemen surrendered to captivity. According to the estimates, the total loss of the enemy was 18 killed and 5 wounded. Among the losses of equipment, the enemy left 13 crossbikes and 3 buggy on the battlefield, which were destroyed by drones. The loss of the personnel of the brigade is not fixed. The area in the Zaporizhia region in the Lipkovo region, where the Russian troops tried to attack again recently, remains relatively calm. The truth is not clear for a long time, but the attacks take place there, they write in Deep State. The troops of the Vyry 241 Separate Brigade of Territorial Defense, which are in the Lipkovo region, were divided by explosive images. Working on the Russians in early June, the situation in this area is relatively calm in comparison with the pressure that the enemy exerts. Bring its advance, the analysts say. Despite constant attempts by small infantry groups to climb on the positions of the fighters of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, it was possible to stabilize the situation and contain the enemy in its attempts to break through the defensive order, they say in Deep State. Important actions to strengthen the Ukrainian air defense. Volunteers will be able to help the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the downing of Russian drones. The Cabinet of Ministers approved the corresponding decision, said the representative of the government of the Verkhovna Rada Taras Melnishuk. This is an experimental project to strengthen the PVO proposed by the Ministry of Defense. The project will involve members of the military formations and volunteer formations of the territorial fleets of the forces of the territorial defense of the VSU. They will be able to detect, escort, and knock down the enemy's air targets with the help of drones, planes, personal weapons, as well as use their own cars and equipment. To do this, they must have the appropriate flight skills and/or qualifications, for example, the certificate of the PPO operator, the Ukrainian Mobile Group of Air Defense based on off-roaders with machine guns of January 23, Ukraine, a photo from the command of the United Forces of the VSU Ukraine. Participants of the volunteer groups will also be able to receive equipment, weapons, and ammunition from the command of the armed forces. The initiative is aimed at strengthening the air defense and will act throughout the legal regime of the military position, but not for more than 2 years. Preparation of participants of the corresponding volunteer groups of the PVO, in particular, will be able to occupy the centers of national resistance. The organizational divisions will be subordinated to the forces of the territorial defense, but the operational command will be imposed on the air forces of the armed forces of Ukraine. In addition, volunteers will be able to receive a reward of up to 100,000 hryvnia, proportional participation per month from local budgets for the counteraction of Russian aggression, writes the head of the organization. Sounds like a good option for those who are ready to stand up for the protection of their native cities and villages, but at the same time want to be sure that they will not be transferred from the PVO to the infantry, which, unfortunately, as we know, has already happened due to forced circumstances. Volunteer of the Mobile Fire Group is not a contractor, not mobilized, and is not a serviceman at all, which means that the command will not be able to transfer him to another position. In Russia, civilians were also attracted to the fight against the unmanned fighters, but there are nuances. Novosibirsk Chapovets, with their perception of the mountain of electric transport, were given a tablet for fighting against the BPA, told the Telegram channel Mesh. In front of this, the defenders of the peaceful sky conducted an instruction. Photos of this Western you evaluate yourself, they are ironic in the channel. In any case, I will explain that it is not so, although you yourself see in the photos that it is not so, but also in addition to the age of the defenders of the Russian sky. The front BPA of the copter type can still be knocked down from the shotguns, which are not particularly visible in the photo, then such a weapon against the long-range drones of the aircraft type, especially a pistol which is given to one of them, is unlikely to help. Here, effective measures of counteraction begin with machine guns, which of course the Chapovets in Russia are afraid to give out, because no matter what, it did not come out. So it looks like some kind of absolute profanity that has nothing to do with reality. We will hope that these two elderly husbands at least will not shoot civilians during an attempt to reflect on some BPA attacks. Russia and Ukraine have finally exchanged bodies of the dead fighters, which, I remind you, the Russian side tried to initiate an earlier agreed term to accuse Ukraine that she allegedly does not want to accept bodies, so as not to admit losses and not to pay compensation to the families. Ukrainian cardiological staff on the issue of contact with the prisoners of war reported the transfer of 1,212 bodies of the dead Ukrainian fighters. According to the words of the Istanbul Bulbola and Vladimir Medinsky, the Russian side received 27 bodies. It's time I repeat that the relationship between the bodies of the dead and their transfer is explained by the fact that the the Russian side continues to attack. Therefore, the places of battle with the bodies of Russian and Ukrainian fighters are most often left behind by the Russians, who then evacuate them, and not immediately, but only when one or another area becomes relatively shallow. Well, that is, Russia has been attacking for 1.5 years. When you attack, here you have territory. One country is defended, one is attacking. The one that attacks is slowly moving forward, and the losses, both on the one hand and on the other, remain in the zone. Well, that is, the dead bodies literally remain in the zone of control of those who attack. Therefore, they can collect bodies. When you defend and leave your positions, you have no opportunity to collect bodies because you are leaving. Therefore, well, this is understood by all of them, including those of the Zetniks, those of them that are more honest. When you see that some Zetnik writes that, look, we returned 1,000 bodies, we returned 100. This means that their losses are 9 times more or 10 times more. Well, you can, in general, exclude these Zetniks from the list, if they are in some of your lists, to find out what is the position of the other side. Because, well, this base is obvious and, how to say, not good-natured from the Zetniks, but those who do not keep their audience completely out of idiots. Those, of course, write honestly that yes, this is because we are attacking. This does not in any way speak of a real relationship of losses. There is nothing to add here. The eternal memory of the dead Ukrainian heroes destroyed by the fascist mercenaries of Putin is a glassy land. General Major Mikhail Drapaty still officially left the post of the commander of the land forces of the VSU and published a post where, among other things, he read about the work done. I will bring him here with abbreviations. I completed the duties of the commander of the land forces. I worked in command for half a year most of the time while doing the duties of the commander of the Horthats. Therefore, a significant part of the process was coordinated remotely. At the time of my appointment, the command of the land forces was in a state of management stagnation. The atmosphere of fear, the absence of initiative, the closeness to feedback, the indifference to the problems of the personnel, the facade discipline, a deep gap between the headquarters and the units, systemal abuse, personnel decisions on acquaintance, low internal organization. I worked to move this system. In half a year, almost half of the commanding staff was updated, including the functions from which the quality of formation and development of the modern army depends. It gradually moved from the culture of fear to the culture of responsibility. Decisions are made not from the concept of status or loyalty, but from the basis of analysis, result, and respect for the subordinate. The first initiative from below ceased to be a threat and began to be perceived as a resource. Not all personnel changes were achieved because the system continues to resist and puts its own self-preservation above the interests of the country and the army. It is not excluded that this was one of the reasons for the course of Drapaty. Unfortunately, one person cannot change the entire system. I will add for myself. Mobilization of the TCC, more than half of the leadership of the territorial centers has been updated. Inside the command, there is a new responsibility for personnel and mobilization. A new vertical is formed, oriented at the result, not at the maintenance of the process. Transparency, legitimacy, respect for the person, what should become the norm, writes Drapatov. Preparation, structural restructuring of the combat preparation system. Commander for the preparation of the part of the leadership has been replaced. Some training centers have been cleared, programs have been updated. PPA, Rep, Cyber. New young leaders from the front are in charge of management. They have brought not only vision and development, but also an understanding of the real needs of the front. In drones, ammunition, components, training, and tactics, digitalization. In parallel with other processes, a digital transformation of management is launched. Combat rear systems are introduced, adapted not to the interests of the supplier, but to the needs of the combat units. Logistics. A new team has begun reformatting the logistics unit. We refuse from the old model of rear support as a self-purpose. Logistics command becomes a service structure working on the unit. Communication. We began to speak with society and with our own personal composition in the language of respect, accuracy, and honesty. For the first time, systematic communication is built not on intimidation or moralizing, but on responsibility. A systematic struggle with corrupt practices, conflicts of interests, trade, and duties has been launched. I do not idealize the result. We could have done more, I could have done more, but I definitely do not regret not in one day of this work. Commanding land forces only at the beginning of the path of change. The system cannot be changed in a few months, but the vector is already set. The team is assembled, the approaches are revised, we work further before the victory, wrote by Drapatov. Of course, we do not see all the processes taking place in the US. However, from the point of view of communication, I would like to note that Drapatov could always expect an operational and adequate reaction to all scandalous situations. Problems in the 155th Brigade before rocket strikes on the polygons. I hope that his replacement will preserve this openness and wish Drapatov success in the command of the Hordes group, which is responsible for the hottest areas of the front in Donbass and Kharkiv. But in general, this is a big loss. It is a pity that Drapatov gave a report of resignation and that the president accepted him. And from the serious to the funny, I can't quite get past how the recent shit around the event events on the towers of the Black Sea has ended. What actually happened there on these towers in recent days, I do not dare to judge. Moreover, both sides of the shit are not rich in proof. It is clear only that the Russian military on the towers suffered losses from Ukrainian rockets and sea drones. Actually, that's why I didn't take the story. It is too confusing. I'm trying to figure it out in it until now. However, here's the story of Ukrainian journalist Yuri Budusov about how this conflict turned out for one of the most comedic characters in this community. Russian military corps Romanov again turned out to be a very cowardly creature. As all Russian propagandists write, Budusov is completely fair. In one of his last posts in Telegram, Romanov told how Russian artificial specialists are being destroyed on the Black Sea platforms, where they are sent to kill them. He was immediately taken to the basement to the Nazis from the Spanish formation and made to apologize for his words. Judging by the mood of Romanov before the performance, he was beaten up. A year ago, Romanov called the Kadyrovs TikTokers who hide behind the back of the emergency services on the border with Ukraine and the Belgorod region. He had to apologize to the Akhmatov Zagreb detachment. There is no peace anywhere, poor military corps, you just can't get enough of popcorn. Ukrainian military took the Russian prisoner and found on his phone another video of a mockery of the Nazis. On the video, the owner of the phone beats up another Russian soldier with an iron pipe. Judging by the comments that he releases himself and the operator, the military is punished for leaving positions. The prisoner Dachenko Valery Vladimirovich, with the call fast, explained to the Ukrainian military his action as follows. Dachenko Valery Vladimirovich, one of the soldiers, was getting away from Samara. He had a call sign. I am a thunder, I am an angel. So we did everything we could with the angel. We gave the command to roll back. We rolled back, helped the thunder for a very long time, pulled him out. When I saw Samara, I warned him that there was simply no possibility. There were other people who would not let me do it. I told him that he would answer for his actions. And there was a situation when there was no one around and he answered for his actions. So he threw us out, he ran away from us. As you can see, the flyer of violence in the Russian army has already spread to such an extent that bullying and beatings are arranged not only by the commander, but also by some soldiers. It is not surprising that those Russian soldiers who, unfortunately, return home arrange the same mess there, accustomed to impunity. And one more curious but symbolic case. The so-called LNR, a sign of fresh meat from the military order, outraged the public. I'm almost sure it's not a coincidence, it's not stupidity, it's not coincidence. Such trifles can blow up the fighting spirit more than Heimerson's arrival, wrote the military officer Kotnak. He added that those who are entertained in this way should engage in competent orgs. Well, they're just opened in one building the military order and a grocery store. The grocery store wrote a sign of fresh meat. They have one entrance. And as a result, the Russian soldiers hung next to the fresh meat, which is fairly fair and reflects the reality, but as you can see, not everyone has some pleasant emotions. The head of the state corporation Rostec, Sergei Chemezov, spoke with a stand-up, which was also his story in the Inspector magazine, about the absence of breakthrough design solutions in Western armored vehicles. According to Chemezov, Russian engineers have not yet managed to study the British tank's Challenger 2, but it is clear in advance that this is a pan. Chemezov was asked whether it is possible to extract something useful or new for us due to the study of Western military vehicles captured by the Russians. If we encounter something useful, of course, we take it for ourselves. We sometimes look, we understand that it is good equipment, but it's completely unusable in our realities, said Chemezov. And the head of Rostec said that Russian engineers have already studied German Leopard tanks, American Abrams, but there is nothing to take. The Leopard tank is made at a high-level modern components fire control system, a powerful engine, although with strange temperature limitations, but we have not seen any breakthrough design solutions. That is, we have nothing to take from the Leopard and apply to ourselves. Our specialists also looked at American Abrams in general, an interesting machine, although there is also nothing to take. I would also like to look at the British Challenger, rather out of curiosity. It is clear in advance that this pan is not very suitable for real battles, said Chemezov. The main problem of most Western armored vehicles, Chemezov called, is the complexity of construction, labor, and service. According to the head of Rostec, Russian tanks T-90M have an advantage in firepower, armor, and mobility. He has a longer hand due to the control of the ammunition and full-range dynamic protection. There have been cases when dozens of Ukrainian drones hit the machine, and it kept the combat capability, said Chemezov. It should be noted that first of all, Chemezov compares the most modern Russian T-90M, which is made with all the tension of force, I remind you, in the best case, 200 pieces a year. The Leopard Abrams of the 70s and 80s, and the last ones in the United States, there are literally thousands. Well, he does not mention that in almost any Russian tank, the crew is literally sitting on the battlefield, and hits often lead to the explosion of a charged machine, which leads to the the epic flight of the turret into the stratosphere, leaving the crew no chance of survival. Unlike Western tanks, where the ammunition is most often stored in a special department in the rear of the turret. In addition, the T-90M has retained the disadvantage of most Soviet tanks in comparison with Western analogs: extremely low rear-end speed, which does not allow to retreat from the battlefield, because the Soviet tank must go only forward, to Lamench, or at least to Pokrovsk. Also, the head of Rostec stated the unjustified delight in American BMP Bradley. This is the funniest thing because, well, I don't know if you follow. The ZVN Corps has been saying for 3 years, and we can do, just take and make Bradley, please, please, stop your BMP-3, please, just make us Bradley, because, well, we have an absolutely terrible BMP. So without dividing the delight in the American BMP Bradley, he says the following: we watched it from different sides. There are advantages in the part of the defense and convenience of the landing department. However, it does not interfere with our means of defeat to destroy the American BMP along with the crew and the landing, said Chemezov. According to him, the weak point of Bradley is the problems with passability, because of which the American BMP becomes an easy target. Well, what's the point of improved defense if the result is one, said Chemezov. Russian BMP, according to the head of Rostec, is superior to the American one. Practically all the Bradley put in Ukraine are destroyed today. It is necessary to understand that the BMP is not a tank. This machine must be fast, mobile, passable to be able to overcome rivers without bridges and roads. Our BMP is able to do it. The American one is not, said Chemezov. Actually, almost all Z-men have long agreed that Bradley is the best BMP in this war, just because even when hit, it leaves the crew with much more chances to survive. And the ability to swim was not useful with the Russian BMP and BTR literally not once during the whole war. Apparently because the preparation of the machine for sailing is not really labor-intensive and long, and the speed when it sails is quite low. Even during a turned-up disaster in an attempt to force the narrow North Donetsk, a pontoon crossing was laid under Belogorovka, which carried out Ukrainian artillery. But about the fact that the BMP is not a tank, Chemezov should be told to the Russian motorists, who will sit in the BMP-3 next to the 100 shells and get out in case of being forced through the roof, unlike the same Bradley, which is as comfortable as possible for disembarking the shell in the feed. In fact, the pride of Rostec, BMP-3 and BMD-4M is just light tanks which, by negligence, still carry infantry. According to the Oryx project data, since the beginning of the war, Russia has lost 4,041 tanks, including 137 T-90M tanks, and Ukraine 1,198 tanks, including 27 Leopard 2 tanks, 18 Leopard 1 tanks, 22 Abrams tanks, and 2 Challenger 2 tanks. In January last year, in one case, 2 American BMP Bradley were able to win the battle of the T-90M tank, and in the other one, Bradley struck 3 Russian BMP-2 at once, and this speaks louder than any excuse for Chemezov. If Ukraine had as many tanks as Russia and it were Abrams and Leopards, then I'm afraid that everything would be much faster. But you see, unfortunately, American Abrams continues to stand in the desert in the number of thousands and will never be used in any military actions because the century of this tank and similar tanks is coming to an end. Military expert and former critic of the Russian design school Andrei Tarasenko passed by the claim of Chemezov. Here's what he wrote about it. An expected excessive military stupidity. Since the time of the study in the USSR of the M48 tank, there was a lot of stuff to learn about. Of course, there's nothing to take from Ambrose if the key decision of the Uralbagan plant is to put a gun barrel into the hull and not change anything for 60 years. The replacement of the B2 engine is a day. Great, why are there some quick-release actions? The driver's seat is archaic, but nothing they endured for half a century and will still endure. A lot of Abrams was captured, and at least one of them was detonated, and it is more difficult to capture the T-90M. With the penetration of the armor, there is a high probability that there is nothing to capture, since the designers at KBTM adhere to the key strategy. Placing the automated tank in the rear compartment of the turret, which communicates with the combat department when charging the gun, will dramatically increase the irreversible losses of the tanks, and in fact, it actually leads the tank to a very low life expectancy. Maybe they still need to learn how to isolate the ammunition in the compartments. You don't need to learn how to isolate fuel tanks either, because in diesel you can put out a cigarette. Only in reality, only the automatic gun charge is always to blame for the fire and explosion of Soviet tanks, but in addition to this, the tank also has fuel. The fall of an armor-piercing subcaliber shell or a cumulative jet with sufficient armored action leads to the destruction of the tank with a water shock and burning of fuel. They put a couple of rubber dampers on the T-90M and wrap the tank with a shrapnel material. That's all the protection. The pro-Russian BMP is superior to the American one. In general, some kind of stupid joke is written, but what to expect if there's knowledge about Bradley derived from the movie War of the Pentagon. Very funny movie. The main thing is to remember that it still has nothing in common with reality. In T-90 tanks, the BMPRF violates the main rules of a good combat vehicle. Production and restoration of the vehicle should be higher than the level of irreversible losses, according to the speed of recovery of losses and the speed of impact of the means of defeat. And if the BMP-3 tank is detonated along with the layer in the hull, then there's nothing to restore there and the storage base of the vehicle is not endless. Almost everyone has already won the Rustek. This is a rare case when you don't care about other people and the vehicle, summarizes Tarasenko. Personally, I think Chemezov is not an idiot. He just relies on the fact that his audience, including Putin, are idiots, and that the Rustek will continue to make unfavorable jokes for any vehicle. With cosmetic modernization in parallel to save money on endless projects of new tanks and BMP, such as Armata or Kurgnets. In general, this is not an interview, this is a stand-up, and it is very good that Chemezov is publicly in such positions. And in all the walls of the Russian military, in hopes that they will be made a normal technique, he will remain in fantasy. Do you remember how they complained recently that why can't you just copy Bradley? Now there is an answer. Because Bradley says nothing to the head of the Rustek. Well, thank God that he says so, thank God, I hope the truth will remain so. However, the Russian military now goes into attack on Bukhanka and Zhigilai, so even about Russian technology is no longer discussed, but it fits into the philosophy of Chemezov. That is, he says, well, if in the end they still beat up, then what's the difference? Well, the truth. And it means that the BMP is not needed because the Russian BMP burns as soon as they appear on the battlefield. In general, so much so that they turned into a taxi, that is, they quickly come, try to quickly distance and leave, and as a rule, they are beaten up either at the moment when they do not leave, or at the moment when they try to leave. Therefore, yes, Bukhanka is a great replacement. The result is the same, right, Chemezov? In general, thank you for the fact that Rustek is controlled by such a person. This is a great gift for Ukraine. Bring a friend. Russians earn millions by sending each other to war against Ukraine. As the Versko newspaper writes, the recruitment for war has grown into a multi-level system of recruiters intermediaries, some of which are the most different Russians, from authorities in the region to women in a decree. For one person who agreed to sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense, the intermediary receives a percentage from the military command, from 5 to 350,000 rubles. You perceive them as such spiders. Their task is to catch someone, and the spider is placed at different stages. Someone is caught in another city, someone is bought tickets, someone is found at enterprises, the employee of the leading selection point at the service told the newspaper. In short, one of the intermediaries with her help will be able to leave for the front without a military ticket and be at the expense of a narcologist with a hepatitis and a switch. The intermediaries are offered to recruit in different regions, which differ in the size of the salary and additional conditions. A showcase of current salaries and benefits throughout Russia is a Telegram channel, where advertising posters with phone numbers of curators appear every hour. In addition to recruitment, in Russia they continue to put on a contract of recruiters. The mother of the soldier of the urgent service of the 676th Separate Engineering Battalion reported that her son Vivier Mikkel, born in 2003, who served in the village of Dacha in the Sakhalin region, was forced to sign a report on the intention to continue military service by contract. Today my son called and said that he was morally forced to write a report on the signing of the contract. The son told his mother that the officers found in his phone a correspondence with the contractor in which he asked to give him pills. The officers thought that this correspondence was enough to threaten the guy in prison in case he did not sign the contract. They said that he was threatened for 3 years by Article 228, Part 1, that he would be imprisoned, and from there immediately to the front in the storm. At the same time, the urgent service was assured that instead of being released, he would still go to war, and if he signs a contract, then they promised to leave him to serve in the unit. Until the end of the urgent service, Mikkel remained only 17 days. Also, Mikkel, leaving for the urgent service, recorded a video message in advance in which he stated that he did not intend to sign the contract, and any signing of documents is asked to be considered invalid. But if there is a contract allegedly signed by me, it was signed as a result of psychological or physical pressure on me, or by some means. The soldier's mother asks competent authorities to interfere in the situation and stop the practice of forcing people to sign a contract. And this is not a single case but a trend, say the human rights activists. Timofey Vaskin, a lawyer at the human rights organization School of the Collar, said that recently there were complaints about falsification of contracts in relation to the soldiers of the urgent service. According to him, one of the main problems in the army is the lack of legal protection, both for the soldiers themselves and for members of their families. For the last 2 weeks, there have been a lot of complaints from the insurgents and their parents and relatives about the fact that these insurgents are forced to sign contracts for the military service or falsify these contracts in relation to them. This is probably one of the most loud cases when a young person was falsified in relation to him. He complained to him, "I don't remember whether in court order or whether the investigation was carried out on a criminal case," on his claim. But in general, while a clear-cut examination was carried out, which confirmed that it was not his signature on the documents, the young person had already died on the front. The head of the human rights organization School of the Collar, Alexei Tabalov, told how one can avoid such consequences in order to save one's life. Your task is not to get into the army today, and if you already got into the army, then resist and do not sign contracts. And here the important word is resist, because if you do not resist, then most likely you will end up in the same war that we're constantly talking about. And I would like to say a few words about these threats that you will be sent to border areas. Well, yes, they can be sent, but they cannot be sent because these areas are not rubber and not everyone can be put into them. But these are just such tough threats that commanders try to make plans. This is the return of the conversation that the value of life does not mean anything. The commander does not care what will happen to your son. It is important for him to make a plan to keep his position. You have to understand that the life of your son in the army does not matter to anyone. It is important for him to keep his position, his pleasure, and to continue to be considered on a good track and not to go to this war himself. The collector of this folklore, Ivan Filippov, found a remarkable post about how the so-called SVO veterans turned out to be unnecessary to anyone in Russia, both in life and after death. By the way, I have a separate video about this.
Какой он герой? У него всего 2 медальки. Житель Омска Александр напал на памятную табличку погибшего на своего соседа. Ему не нравится, что она висит на фасаде дома и мозолит глаза, поэтому он взял лопату и решил разбить ее. Он здесь висеть не будет. Здесь вам не кладбище.
Resident of Omsk, Alexander attacked a memorial plaque of his deceased neighbor. He does not like that it hangs on the facade of the house and blinks his eyes, so he took a shovel and decided to break it. He will not hang here. This is not a cemetery, said the man. People in the yard were able to drive Alexander away from the plaque and shoot a video of the incident. Sometime later, the wives of the members of the SVO came to talk to Alexander and find out what exactly does not suit him. But Alexander, like a real brave man, locked himself in the apartment and never came out to talk to women. This is not a shovel for you to go to the plaque. He was scared, poor guy. Konstantin Magdalin, Alexander's neighbor, died at the SVO 2 years ago. In 1924, he was solemnly buried in Omsk, and a memorial plaque was installed on the facade of the house. And now his neighbor is trying to destroy the memory of Konstantin's feat so that his face does not blur his eyes. This is not the first such case in Omsk. In 1923, the school principal Marina Kovalenko opposed the installation of a memorial plaque of the SVO hero on the facade of the school. If we all hang, the walls will not be enough. This is not a cemetery for you. It is a pity that in the 4th year of the SVO, there are still people whose portraits of the heroes who gave their lives blur their eyes. The people who do not remember their heroes are doomed to non-existence, writes Vika Tsikhanova. No, Vika, the people just remember the real heroes who fought with fascism without any official victory, but the soldiers of Putin's occupation army are doomed to non-existence in the best case. And by the way, most likely they will not even be able to be humanly buried. The pensioner had to get a debt to bury the grandson of the member of the SVO, Irid Kozlova, deaf pensioner from Kattenburg, and the 2-year-old grandmother of 28-year-old Nikita, who died in the war. Irid is the closest relative of the soldier, since her mother abandoned her boyfriend. Due to the fact that the grandmother is disabled, she was not allowed to take care of her grandson, however. Irid constantly participated in the upbringing of the boy and visited him in the boarding school. After the death of her grandson, the woman could not pay the payments because she was not officially his patron. Also, the money that Nikita earned on her woman did not receive since they were removed by fraudsters. Criminals have never been found. There has been a refusal of payments without any accompanying letter. We went to court. He admitted that the 2-year-old grandmother was at Nikita's funeral. So the situation in our family happened that they lived in the same apartment and he provided for her. In order to bury her grandson, Irida had to get a debt. The pensioner is going to pay the debt with a pension, which is 16,000 rubles. She did not have enough money for the monument. Irida's relatives turned to the military prosecutor's office to solve this problem. But guess for yourself whether this problem will be solved or not. There will be no rest during life or after death for the participants of the Russian fascist occupation army. Therefore, do everything possible, especially if you are a close relative, so that your close person does not fall into this war, does not become a murderer, and does not become a corpse. And with you was Michael Nacke, and see you soon. All the best. Bye.